Okay, the purpose of this workshop is to really aid you in better understanding the materials within your class textbook, particularly when we're talking here about statistics. Now, the goal is not to turn you into a statistician, so I don't want you to worry about that. Instead, we're going to provide you a working knowledge of statistics. And it's really useful to have this basic understanding because you need it to evaluate the research studies that you're going to be looking at. It also helps you enhance your own skills because sometimes even your jobs might require a background in measurement or statistics. For example, in the training and development field, practitioners use statistical tools all the time to help validate their needs assessments and training evaluations. Likewise, in marketing and sales, those people often use statistics within their employment. So as we work our way through this lesson and subsequent lessons, you want to think in terms both of the theoretical and the practical uses of employing the statistical techniques that you're going to learn about, as well as what you might see within research studies or those that you put in your research paper. Now, if you look on page 1 of this workbook, you'll see that for this module, module 1, we're going to cover 4 objectives. So we're going to distinguish between descriptive and inferential statistics. We're going to define a sample, we're going to define a variable, and we're going to differentiate between the scales of measurement. Okay? So if you turn to page 2, we are going to begin with talking about descriptive statistics. Now, a descriptive statistic is a number that can be categorized or cataloged, and it depicts a set of data. So examples of descriptive statistics are the mean, the mode, and the median, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. You certainly have heard of the mean. Typically, when you answer a survey of some sort, there is a section that asks about demographic data. So if we look at this survey here, if you go downtown and you go to, in this case, the Steppenwolf Theater, at the end of their performance, they give their attendees this survey to complete. And if you look at this survey, you'll see that there is questions about gender and age and ethnicity, income, etc. And these are demographic questions. So if the survey information was entered into a statistical package, then the information would fall under the category of descriptive statistics. Again, it would fall under the category of descriptive statistics. Now, you're going to see in many research studies the use of descriptive statistics. Besides those, you're also going to see information on inferential statistics. And inferential statistics is a technique that considers chance or the probability of error when samples are being employed to investigate certain theories or assumptions about a particular population. Therefore, statistical tools testing for statistical significance are likely to be inferential statistics. Now, some examples of the tools might be correlations, t-tests, ANOVA, etc. So let me highlight, when we talk about statistical significance, those statistical tests are actually trying to see whether some type of intervention or some type of experiment, actually the result was the result due to chance or due to some type of intervention or some type of manipulation. So that's what it means when we're talking about statistical significance. And whenever you see that, more than likely we're talking about inferential statistics. So if you look on page 3, you'll see that there's an example of a correlation. And in this example, we're looking at the relationship between exercise and blood pressure. So in this example, a researcher would employ inferential statistics, which is the correlation, to figure out what that relationship is between exercise and blood pressure. Now, at this point, I don't want you to worry about how do you read this output, because we are going to talk about that in a later module. But for now, I just want you to simply grasp the idea between the difference between inferential statistics, where here this is actual manipulation of information to produce a result, whereas descriptive statistics are really discussing more about again, the demographics, frequency data. So That would be the difference between inferential statistics versus descriptive statistics. So now we're going to go on to address two more additional concepts used in research studies. And in this case, we're going to look at sample and variable. Okay, when we talk about a sample, we're simply talking about a subset of a larger group. Okay, as we talked about before, or as you read in your textbooks, that usually when we're doing a research study, we're considering a population as a whole. But because we can't study the population as a whole, because usually populations are quite large, then researchers take a sample of that population. Now, for now, the big thing is to just make sure that you're clear on what is a sample versus what is a population. Don't get too caught up and worried about the two, because from a practical point of view, you're more likely to carry out a study using a sample. I mean, it's very rare that you would actually measure the whole population, though you have to be aware that your sample is hopefully reflective of the population. Oftentimes, researchers use a very practical approach in the sense of their sample is likely to be one of convenience. And what that simply means is that they have access to subjects that they could use as their sample. And often it's undergraduate students at universities. So that is something to just be aware of in terms of when you're looking at research studies, to look at what kind of sample the researcher used. Because in some cases, that could be a limitation of their study. The second concept is a variable. Now I am on page 4 of the workbook. So a variable is simply some type of entity that is typically quantifiable beyond 1. So for example, gender has male and female, and for the truly progressive, if we have transgendered, that might be awarded a number. And even though gender is considered nominal data, which means that is categorical data, it doesn't, so when you put a number on it, the number really doesn't mean anything. So for example, if you have a category of household pets, dog might be reflected as a 1, cats might be reflected as a 2, birds as a 3, and that's simply, we use that when we enter a statistical software package such as SPSS. We're just naming a variable. Now, even though gender is considered nominal data, it's still a variable. And it's a variable, like I said, that will enter into a statistical software package and run statistics on it, because we might want to look at the relationship, let's say, to gender versus online student success when they're taking classes online. So a variable could be something, like I said, gender. A variable could also be an item that you're measuring within various instruments. So if you were using an attitudinal instrument or a self-efficacy instrument or an IQ instrument, those items within those instruments could also be reflected as variables, or just the fact that attitude in and of itself is a variable. So if you're using an attitudinal instrument and you employ a scale of a strongly agree to strongly disagree response set, then you have the variable of attitude and the value labels, or the variable labels, that you would enter into your statistical software package as 5 equals strongly agree, 4 equals agree, 3 equals neutral, 2 equals disagree, 1 equals strongly disagree. So these are just the variable labels that name your variable of attitude. So again, you have variables that just represent some type of entity that is quantifiable. But now the key here to think about is in terms of how we're quantifying it. Are we just naming it as something, or does the number actually reflect something? Because we're going to talk about the differences between the scales of measurement, because you need to understand that while we have variables such as attitude, we use scales to measure those variables, and those scales then influence the type of statistics we use. So let's move on to differentiating between scales of measurements. And for those of you who have had a stats class before, you probably recognize what those 4 scales are, and those are nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. And again, these 4 scales play a big role in determining what type of statistical analysis a researcher can carry out. So to learn more about these scales, I want you to stop this video at this point, and I want you to click this link within the workbook, and I want you to watch the video and then come back to this training video. Okay, so you have grasped some of the fundamental concepts of statistics. You understand the various scales of measurement. And now you're going to move on to the next lesson, which is Module 2, in which you'll further develop your understanding of research methods by learning more about the most popular statistical tools researchers are likely to use within their studies.